I never imagined I would feel completely invisible in my own family, like a shadow nobody acknowledged. But there I was, sitting in my grandma's old living room, the kind of room that smelled faintly of old books and lavender polish, staring across the space at my younger brother Jason, who looked back at me with that infuriatingly self-satisfied smirk that always meant trouble. I could see it in his eyes, the arrogance, the quiet thrill of thinking he had power over me, and my stomach turned in knots. He leaned back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, hands folded behind his head like a man who had the world under his control. And in that calm, unnerving tone, he said words I will never forget for as long as I live. He said I didn't belong in this family, that I was not really a Harris, that all these years I had been living a lie without even knowing it. At first, I laughed nervously because I wanted to believe it was some kind of twisted joke, a cruel attempt to make me react. But the way he looked at me, the dead seriousness in his eyes, told me instantly that he meant every word. I could feel my heart tighten, the warmth of the living room fatting into cold dread, and I sat there, 50 years old, and suddenly felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath me. My own brother, the person I had shared a lifetime of birthdays, holidays, and late-night secrets with, was actively trying to erase me from the story of my own family, as if every memory, every laugh, every fight had been meaningless. Anger surged, but beneath it was a wave of hurt so sharp it took my breath away. How could someone I grew up with, someone I called family, try to destroy the very foundation of my identity? I felt a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and a deep, gnawing sadness, the kind that makes your chest ache for hours and leaves you restless through the night. I tried to respond, to find words that could stand against the absurdity of what he was saying, but nothing came out. My throat was dry, my hands felt clammy, and for a moment I considered just walking away, ignoring his cruel claim, pretending it hadn't happened. But something in me refused to let this slide, something that refused to let a lifetime of shared history be discarded by his envy or bitterness. And that was when I remembered something my grandma had told me years ago, in that soft, gentle voice that always carried wisdom beyond my understanding at the time. She had mentioned keeping records of our family, videos, stories, moments that might one day be important. Moments that captured the truth of who we were and how we were connected. At the time, I had brushed it off, thinking it was one of her sentimental habits, one of those things older people do to feel that their lives are preserved in memory. Now, sitting there with my brother's words still hanging in the air like a dark cloud, I realized that perhaps those old recordings could be my salvation, the evidence that would prove my place in this family, and more importantly, expose the absurdity of Jason's jealousy and lies. I didn't yet know what secrets my grandma had hidden away, or how she had managed to capture moments that would leave him speechless. But I knew in my gut that she had seen this coming, that she had prepared for a day when someone might try to challenge the bond she had worked so hard to preserve between her grandchildren. I felt a strange mix of hope and anxiety, knowing that the next steps I took could change everything, that the balance of power in our family, long held by our shared memories and respect for Grandma, was about to shift in ways I couldn't yet fully imagine. Sitting there, I made a quiet promise to myself that I would uncover the truth. I would find the evidence, whatever it took, because I was not about to let someone rewrite my life, not even my own brother. Little did I know that the journey I was about to take would not only prove my identity, but also reveal family secrets I had never suspected. Secrets that would shake the very foundations of our household and change my relationship with Jason forever. That day, as the late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows of Grandma's living room, casting long shadows on the worn carpet, I realized that this confrontation was more than just an argument between siblings. It was the beginning of a journey into the past, into the hidden corners of our family history, and ultimately, into the heart of what it really meant to be a Harris. My name is Michael Harris, and I've spent every year of my life in the small town where I was born, the kind of town where everyone knows your name and most of your business too. Life here moved slowly, measured by the passing seasons, the high school football games, and the smell of freshly baked pies drifting from the corner bakery that had been around since before I was born. My family was far from perfect, and like any family, we had our share of disagreements, misunderstandings, and moments that made you wonder if love alone was enough to hold us together. But for the most part, we were close. We had traditions, small routines, and an unspoken understanding that family, even when flawed, was always a safety net. Grandma lived with us for as long as I could remember, occupying the room at the end of the hallway, the one with the faded floral curtains and the quilt she had stitched by hand over decades. She was the glue that held our little world together, the quiet presence that reminded us of what mattered. She had a way of making even the simplest moments feel profound, like when she would tell stories of her own childhood, stories filled with adventure, mystery, and lessons wrapped in laughter. She was wise, loving, and full of secrets that made life more complicated and fascinating than I could have imagined as a child. She always had a knowing look in her eye, the kind that suggested she was aware of things others were blind to, and she carried herself with a quiet authority that demanded respect without ever raising her voice. Over the years, my brother Jason and I grew apart in ways I didn't notice at first. When we were young, we were inseparable, partners in crime, exploring the woods behind our house, catching frogs, building forts, and sharing secrets we swore we would never tell anyone. But as we got older, subtle changes began to appear. Jason had always been competitive, a little brash, and eager to prove himself in everything he did. At first, I admired it, and sometimes I joined in, but as the years passed, his competitiveness began to take a darker turn. He wanted to outdo me in school, in sports, and eventually in life itself. I loved him, of course, as a brother should, but I could see the envy simmering under the surface, the pride that sometimes blinded him to the people around him, and worst of all, to me. The small digs at first were almost laughable, comments about my choices, my career, or the way I handled money, delivered with a smirk or a careless laugh that seemed innocent at first. I would brush them off, laughing along, thinking it was just his way of joking. But over time, these little remarks piled up, and it became harder to ignore the undercurrent of resentment that ran through our interactions. What once felt like friendly rivalry started to turn into something heavier, more insidious, something I couldn't quite name at the time. It was subtle but constant, a tension that lingered in the air whenever we were together, growing thicker and more suffocating with each passing year. And then came the night at Grandma's, a night that started like any other, with the smell of her chicken pot pie simmering in the kitchen, the warmth of the living room filled with memories of family gatherings, laughter, and the occasional playful argument over cards or board games. But this night was different. I didn't see it coming, not in a million years. The subtle tension that had been simmering between Jason and me boiled over in an instant. His jealousy and pride, long hidden behind a facade of smiles and casual jokes, erupted with a force that knocked the air out of the room. I never expected him to question something so fundamental about me, about our shared blood, about the history we had grown up with. It was shocking, surreal, and deeply painful. In that moment, I realized that the distance between us was no longer just about sibling rivalry or minor competition. It had transformed into full-blown hostility, a desire to rewrite reality itself. Sitting there in that familiar living room, the weight of the years pressing down on me, the memories of childhood blending with the harshness of the present, I felt a mixture of disbelief and heartbreak. This was my brother, the person who had shared my life from the very beginning, and yet here he was, attempting to erase my very existence from our family's story. And in that instant, I understood that nothing would ever be the same again, that the bond I thought unbreakable could be threatened by envy and misunderstanding, and that the journey to reclaim my place in this family was just beginning. It was a gray, overcast afternoon when I found myself climbing the narrow stairs to Grandma's attic, the wood creaking under my weight, each step echoing like a whisper of the past. Dust hung in the air, thick and stubborn, coating every surface with the scent of decades gone by, a mixture of mothballs, aged paper, and faint lavender that always reminded me of her. Grandma had passed away a few months earlier, and the house, once vibrant with her warmth and laughter, now felt like a shrine of memories, each room heavy with absence and quiet echoes of the life she had led. I wasn't alone, though, and that was part of the tension. Jason followed me up the narrow stairs, his presence irritatingly smug, and I could feel the familiar knot of unease forming in my chest the moment he entered the attic. The attic itself was a small, sloping space, cramped yet magical, a place where I had spent countless hours as a child playing hide-and-seek among stacks of old trunks, cardboard boxes, and forgotten toys. Now, it was a museum of the past, filled with remnants of lives lived, stories preserved in faded photographs, yellowed letters, and the unmistakable scent of nostalgia that seemed almost tangible. I started to move boxes around carefully, brushing aside cobwebs, trying to immerse myself in the memories, but Jason's voice cut sharply through the quiet. He was making comments, casual at first, but sharp as knives once you listened closely. He questioned me in that familiar, cutting tone, saying that maybe I didn't belong, that perhaps I was adopted, that maybe I wasn't a real Harris at all. I froze at first, stunned, hoping that somehow I had misheard, that he was joking, trying to get a reaction out of me as he always did. But no, his eyes were cold, calculating, and full of a strange satisfaction, and I realized in that instant that he meant every word. I tried to brush it off, to focus on the boxes, the fragile relics of Grandma's life, anything to avoid acknowledging the sting in my chest, the way my hands trembled slightly as I lifted an old trunk. But the words clung to me, sticking in my mind, echoing louder than any creaking floorboard, and I felt my blood begin to boil. How could the man I grew up with, the one who had shared my birthday parties, my childhood secrets, my worst and best moments, now be questioning something so fundamental about me? The very idea that he could try to rewrite our family history, to cast doubt on decades of shared memories, was incomprehensible. I finally turned to him, my voice shaking slightly with a mixture of anger and disbelief. I asked him why he was saying these things, why he wanted to throw away everything that defined us as a family, why he was trying to erase me from the story of our lives. Jason simply shrugged, leaning against a dusty chest, and said that it was what he had always suspected. That offhand remark felt like a punch to the gut. Always suspected. As if he had spent years quietly harboring this doubt, letting it fester and grow into a cruel obsession that he was now ready to unleash. I could feel a wave of sadness washing over me, a deep, piercing sorrow that mingled with the anger and disbelief churning inside me. This was my brother, my family, and yet he was actively trying to dismantle the foundation of my life, attempting to erase me from a history we had shared since childhood. I looked around the attic at the dusty boxes, the stacks of old family albums and the forgotten letters, and for a moment I felt a strange sense of vulnerability. Everything I had known about family, everything I had trusted, seemed to hang in the balance, threatened by one man's envy and misguided assumptions. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, and I realized that the betrayal was not just in the words Jason had spoken, but in the years of subtle disdain, the quiet resentments that had grown beneath the surface, unnoticed until now. The brother I had loved, the man I had trusted to have my back through life, had become an agent of doubt and hurt, and I felt a mix of sadness and disbelief so intense it was almost physical. And yet, amidst the anger and pain, a spark of determination began to grow inside me. I could not allow this to stand. I could not let him, or anyone, rewrite the truth of who I was and where I came from. Grandma had always believed in the power of family, in the importance of truth, and I knew somewhere in the back of my mind, Tucked away in some corner of this attic, she had left pieces of that truth waiting for me. I didn't yet know what form it would take, whether photographs, letters, or perhaps a hidden video, but I felt an unshakable certainty that she had prepared for this moment, that she had anticipated the day when someone might question my place in this family. And in that realization, a quiet, burning resolve began to take hold. Jason's betrayal was real, painful, and shocking, but it was not the end of the story. The attic, with its layers of dust and memories, held secrets that would soon change everything. Secrets that would prove my place in this family beyond any doubt and leave Jason confronting a truth he never saw coming. Even after I left the attic that day, even after the heavy words Jason had thrown at me had faded into echoes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly off. It wasn't just the usual sibling tension, the petty rivalries that had marked our childhood, or the little competitions that had once seemed harmless. No, this felt different. It felt deliberate, calculated, as if he had been waiting for the right moment to strike at the heart of who I was. Jason had always been a secretive man, the kind of person who measured his words, who stored grudges like treasures and used them when it served him best. But this went beyond anything I had ever known. This was no longer about winning or proving himself. This was about dismantling the very identity I had spent my life believing was mine. And the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. There was a subtle, creeping dread that I couldn't shake, like a shadow stretching across everything I thought I knew about my family, about the people who had shaped me, about my own history. As I sat alone in my quiet house that evening, sipping a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, my mind kept drifting back to Grandma. Her warm, gentle face appeared in my memory, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, the soft tone of her voice when she spoke about life and love and family. She had loved both Jason and me equally. I was sure of that, and she had always treated us with the same mixture of patience, humor, and quiet authority that commanded respect without ever needing to raise her voice. I remembered her leaning over the kitchen table as a child, telling us stories of the past, stories about great-grandparents, family hardships, and moments of joy, always emphasizing the importance of honesty and truth, of standing by the people you loved, and of never allowing misunderstandings to fester into resentment. And yet here was Jason, questioning something so fundamental, something so obvious, as if all those lessons, all that love, meant nothing to him. It didn't make sense. I replayed conversations in my head, trying to find some clue, some incident that might have triggered this, but nothing fit. Grandma had never shown favoritism, never hinted at secrets that could divide us. Everything she had taught us about loyalty, about family, seemed in stark contrast to the venom I had witnessed in Jason's words. My mind refused to rest. I felt a deep unease, a gnawing sense that there was more beneath the surface, something hidden, something I had overlooked all these years. Then, as if a light switched on in my memory, I remembered something Grandma had told me long ago, a detail I had never taken seriously. She had mentioned keeping records, not just photographs, not just letters, but videos, a sort of family diary. She had said it was a precaution, something for us to watch one day, in case we ever needed to remember, in case we ever questioned who we were or where we came from. At the time, I had smiled and nodded, thinking it was one of her sentimental whims, another quirk of a grandmother who loved to preserve every little moment. I had never sought out those videos, never thought they would matter, because everything about my family felt tangible, real, and unquestionable. But now, in the cold light of Jason's betrayal, every instinct in me screamed that those videos held the answers I needed. They might hold the proof that could shut down his accusations once and for all, the evidence of truth that could restore the balance in our fractured family. I began to plan, almost obsessively, imagining the dusty boxes in Grandma's attic, the old VHS tapes and DVDs she had hidden somewhere, patiently waiting for me to discover them. I pictured the smile on her face, as if she had known that someday one of us would need her foresight to navigate a moment of darkness, a confrontation that threatened to unravel everything she had built. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that Grandma had left me a lifeline, a way to prove not just my place in the family, but also to expose the irrational envy and suspicion that had grown in Jason over the years. I felt a mix of determination and anxiety, a rush of adrenaline that made my hands tingle and my heart race. This wasn't just about confronting him anymore. This was about uncovering a hidden truth, a legacy of honesty that Grandma had preserved for moments exactly like this. That night I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining her hands recording those videos, imagining her carefully documenting moments, conversations, family gatherings, and milestones, knowing that someday they might be needed to remind us of what was real. The thought filled me with a strange comfort, as if her love was still guiding me, even in her absence, even as Jason tried to rewrite our family history. And deep down, I knew that finding those videos would not just answer questions about my identity. It would expose the truth in a way that words alone never could. It would prove that loyalty, honesty, and the bonds we share cannot be erased by jealousy or spite, and that even in the face of betrayal, the truth always has a way of coming to light. The next morning, I woke with a restless energy that refused to be calmed, a mixture of anticipation, fear, and determination pulsing through me. The sun was barely rising, casting pale streaks of light across my bedroom floor, but sleep had abandoned me hours ago. I couldn't stop thinking about Jason, about his smug accusations, about the venom that had suddenly poisoned the air in our family. I knew that somewhere, hidden away in Grandma's house, there was the proof I needed, the evidence that could silence the doubts, expose the truth, and finally restore the sense of belonging I had always taken for granted. Without another thought, I dressed quickly, grabbed my keys, and drove the familiar streets back to her old home, the one filled with decades of memories, the smell of her cooking, the faint scent of lavender and old books still lingering in the air, like a ghost of her presence. I entered the house slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the dim morning light filtering through the lace curtains. Each step I took felt weighted with the past, the echoes of childhood laughter, the small arguments, the warm embraces, and the quiet moments of wisdom she had shared with me. The house seemed almost alive in that early light, as if it recognized the gravity of what I was about to do, the solemnity of the discovery I was seeking. I moved carefully through the rooms, pausing to run my hands over the furniture, over the photographs on the walls, over the familiar objects that had been part of my life for so long. I felt a strange combination of sadness and hope, like I was walking on the threshold between the past and the future, between despair and revelation. I searched through the living room, the bedrooms, the closets, running my fingers along shelves crowded with old family albums and boxes filled with letters, cards, and little trinkets I had long forgotten. Every drawer I opened, every corner I explored, seemed to whisper her presence, her guidance, and I could almost hear her voice telling me to be patient, to look carefully, to trust that the truth was waiting for me. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes, until I finally found myself standing in the study, a room that had always felt like the heart of the house, lined with bookshelves and photographs, a desk that she had used for years cluttered with papers and pens and memories. And there, tucked under the desk, I noticed an old box, worn with age, the cardboard frayed and softened by time, but carefully labeled with both our names in her familiar handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the box and carried it to the desk. Inside, I discovered a collection of old VHS tapes, their labels handwritten in careful script, some faded almost beyond recognition, and a dusty, outdated DVD player, the kind that hummed faintly when powered on. I could feel my pulse quickening as I set it all up, fumbling with cords and buttons that felt both familiar and alien at the same time. I inserted the first tape, pressed play, and the screen flickered to life. The grainy image resolved into the warm, familiar figure of my grandmother sitting in her favorite chair, her hair perfectly styled, a gentle smile on her face, as if she had somehow known that I would be sitting here in this very moment, seeking answers. Her voice was soft, soothing, and full of the warmth that had always defined her. She began speaking directly to us, to Jason and me, telling stories of our family, of the love she had for both of us, of the bond she had always hoped we would share and never break. But then, as I watched, my stomach tightening with anticipation, she revealed something I could never have imagined. She began to speak about the circumstances of my birth, the confusion that had occurred at the hospital, a mix-up that had left some family members uncertain, a small rumor that had somehow grown into doubt over the years. She explained it all clearly, meticulously, with dates, names, and even video clips of family gatherings showing me as a baby, held in her arms, Jason smiling proudly beside her. Each word, each frame of video, sank into me like a revelation, filling me with shock, relief, and an overwhelming wave of emotion that left me frozen in place. I sat there, the tape rolling, my mind spinning as memories of my childhood flooded back, each moment with Grandma, each laugh, each hug, each lesson she had ever taught me coming back in vivid detail. I remembered the quiet evenings spent in her kitchen, the smell of baking bread, her stories by the fireplace, the warmth of her embrace when life had felt uncertain. And now, through this video, she had given me something far greater than memories. She had given me proof, irrefutable evidence of my place in this family, proof that Jason's doubts were unfounded, that his envy and misunderstanding had clouded his judgment for reasons he could no longer justify. I felt a mixture of relief and vindication, a warmth spreading through me, tempered by the sorrow of knowing that this truth had been hidden, waiting for me to find it when I was ready to confront it. Tears blurred my vision as I leaned back in the chair, unable to speak, unable to move, overwhelmed by the sheer gravity of what I was witnessing. This was more than a discovery. It was a reclamation of identity, a restoration of the bond my grandmother had always believed in and worked so hard to protect. I knew then that nothing Jason could say, no argument he could make, would ever change the truth that had just been laid bare before me. I was a Harris, fully and completely, and my place in this family was unshakable. The realization filled me with a quiet strength, a renewed sense of purpose, and a resolve to confront Jason with this evidence, not out of anger, but out of the need for justice, clarity, and the restoration of the truth that had always been ours. Sitting there in the study, surrounded by boxes and memories, watching my grandmother speak to us from the past, I understood something profound. She had prepared this moment for me, had anticipated the shadows of doubt and envy that might creep into our lives, and had left a trail of truth that could never be ignored. And in that instant, I felt a deep connection to her, a sense of gratitude that went beyond words, and a determination to ensure that her love, her wisdom, and her foresight would not be in vain. For the first time in days, perhaps weeks, I felt a sense of calm, a quiet certainty that the next steps I took would restore balance, expose the lies, and finally allow our family to face the truth without the shadows of doubt and betrayal hanging over us. I sat there in the dim light of Grandma's study, the glow from the flickering television illuminating the room in a warm, almost sacred hue. And I realized that what I was about to witness was not just a memory, not just a fragment of the past, but a truth so profound it would alter the course of everything I thought I knew about my life and my family. As the video continued to play, her calm, loving voice filled the room, soft yet unwavering, carrying the authority of decades of wisdom and the quiet power of a woman who had seen generations rise and fall, who had watched families grow, falter, and heal, and who understood better than anyone the importance of truth and clarity. She began to speak about the day I was born, a day that had long held confusion, whispers, and misgivings among some relatives, though never spoken aloud to me. Her words were deliberate, precise, full of tenderness, yet charged with the weight of undeniable fact. Grandma explained that at the hospital on the day I had entered the world, there had been a minor mix-up, a clerical error, nothing sinister or malicious, just a human mistake that had somehow taken root in the form of doubt and suspicion among certain family members. She recounted the chaos of that day, the nurses hurrying between rooms, the Barbies wrapped in identical blankets, and the confusion that had arisen in the records. And then, with the gentle authority she had always commanded, she clarified every detail, correcting every misconception, labeling each step with precision and care, ensuring that there could be no question that I was indeed her grandson, fully and unequivocally a Harris. As I listened, my chest expanded with a mixture of disbelief and relief, the knot of tension I had carried for weeks finally beginning to unravel. Then came the visual proof. The screen shifted to a family gathering, a warm, sunlit afternoon captured on one of her old camcorder tapes. I saw myself as a tiny baby, bundled in a soft blanket, in the exact same arms that had comforted me all my life, her hands steady, her face serene and full of love. Beside her, Jason stood proudly, beaming with the innocence and curiosity of a child who had no reason to doubt or question, a moment frozen in time that contradicted every accusation he had ever made. I watched, transfixed, as every frame seemed to reaffirm the story my grandmother was telling, every detail meticulous, intentional, and irrefutable. The way she had recorded these moments, how carefully she had preserved them, revealed a foresight I had never fully appreciated before. She had known somehow that one day, these tapes might be the anchor we needed, a reminder of what was real, a defense against the whispers of doubt that could so easily creep into the hearts of those we loved. As the video continued, she spoke again, addressing both Jason and me directly, emphasizing the bonds of family, the love she had for both of us, and the hope she carried that we would never let envy, suspicion, or misunderstandings destroy what we shared. Her words were not just informational. They carried an emotional weight that wrapped around me, mingling with the tears I hadn't realized had begun to fall. Each detail she shared, each photograph she held up, each story she recounted validated everything I had ever felt, everything I had believed about our family. It was undeniable. Every suspicion Jason had nurtured over the years, every rumor he had heard, every misinterpretation he had clung to, was based on nothing more than misunderstandings, human error, and assumptions. Grandma's documentation left no room for doubt. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, deeper and more profound than I had imagined possible. The years of tension, the gnawing anxiety that Jason's accusations had caused, began to dissolve like morning mist under the rising sun. I realized that this revelation was about far more than proving something to my brother. It was about recognizing the depth of my grandmother's love, her careful attention to detail, her unwavering commitment to both of her grandchildren. She had trusted me, protected me, and ensured that the truth would never be lost, even if the people around me faltered in their judgment. In that moment, I understood that the tapes were more than evidence. They were a testament to her foresight, her devotion, and the unbreakable bonds of family she had worked so hard to preserve. Sitting there overwhelmed, I felt gratitude swell inside me, a mix of reverence for her wisdom and relief that the shadow of doubt that had been cast over my identity was finally lifted. Every memory I had of Grandma, her laughter, her gentle scolding, her bedtime stories, the way she would hum softly while knitting, the patience she had shown me when I made mistakes, suddenly carried a new weight, a new significance. I understood now that she had always been my anchor, that she had been guarding the truth, not just for the sake of facts, but to protect the integrity of our family, to ensure that love and trust would always triumph over envy and misconception. And in that quiet, sunlit study, surrounded by the tangible remnants of her life, with the images of our past playing before me, I realized something profound. The revelation was not only about correcting a misunderstanding, it was about reconnecting with the essence of who we were as a family, about honoring the love, trust, and meticulous care my grandmother had poured into our lives. The proof was in the images, in her voice, in the meticulous record she had left behind, and in that undeniable clarity, I felt a sense of peace I had not known in decades. The truth had surfaced as it always does, illuminating the darkness cast by doubt, and I finally understood that no matter what Jason believed, no matter the tension or the resentment, the love and foresight of my grandmother had ensured that the truth could never be denied. The days after that confrontation unfolded like a slow, careful healing. The kind of healing that doesn't announce itself but settles into the quiet corners of life, shifting the weight of tension into something lighter, something almost imperceptible at first. Jason kept his distance initially, as though he needed time to process not just the proof I had shown him, but the reality of his own actions, the weight of the words he had spoken, the way his envy and misunderstanding had shaped his perception of our family for decades. At first, it was awkward, a careful navigation of space and silence, a dance of cautious civility that neither of us wanted to disrupt. There were no grand declarations or dramatic apologies in the beginning, just small, tentative steps toward recognition, toward acknowledgement that the past could no longer hold sway over the truth that had been laid bare. Eventually, he approached me one evening, quiet, his eyes betraying a mixture of shame and sincerity, and he spoke words I had longed to hear, though not in the way I had imagined. He didn't launch into a dramatic confession or try to justify his behavior. Instead, he simply admitted that he had been wrong, that his suspicions had been unfounded, that he had let pride and envy cloud his judgment for far too long. There was genuine emotion in his voice, a softness I had not heard since we were children, the kind of vulnerability that comes only when someone is finally confronting their own mistakes. I listened, not with anger, not with vindication, but with a deep understanding of the human flaws that had driven him, the fears and insecurities that had grown unchecked over the years. And in that moment, I chose to forgive him, because holding on to bitterness would dishonor everything Grandma had stood for, everything she had worked so hard to protect, the love and truth she had left behind for both of us. I realized then that family conflicts are often born not of malice but of misunderstandings, envy, or fear, and if left unaddressed, they fester quietly, poisoning relationships over time. It is easy to assume the worst, to let suspicion and pride dictate the narrative, but the truth, once illuminated, has the power to heal even the deepest rifts. Jason and I began to rebuild our trust slowly, like mending an old quilt thread by thread, patch by patch. We started sharing stories again, laughing at memories that had once seemed mundane, recalling moments of childhood mischief, misadventures, and the quiet lessons Grandma had woven into our lives. We spoke about the past, yes, but also about the future, about the importance of not letting envy or misunderstanding shape the story of our lives. There was a sense of peace that settled over me during those days, a quiet affirmation that the truth had been revealed, that justice, in its simplest form, had been served, not through confrontation or anger, but through clarity and love. I no longer needed Jason's words to validate my place in the family. The proof had always been there, preserved by Grandma's foresight, and that knowledge brought a calm I had not experienced in years. I felt recognized, respected, and validated, not because of a confrontation won or an argument ended, but because the truth had surfaced, unassailable and unwavering, and I had the clarity to accept it with grace. Our relationship with each other, once frayed and tense, began to take on new dimensions, informed by the lessons we had both learned. There was a newfound patience, a willingness to listen, to question assumptions, to approach each other with empathy rather than judgment. We started honoring Grandma in new ways, not just by visiting her favorite spots or keeping her house as she left it, but by embracing the principles she had taught us: love, truth, patience, and the courage to confront doubts with clarity rather than resentment. Each shared story, each quiet conversation, was a tribute to her foresight, a reminder that family, though sometimes tested, has a resilience rooted in honesty and trust. In the quiet evenings, as I sat on the porch where we had confronted the past, watching the sun dip below the horizon and the shadows stretch across the yard, I felt a profound sense of closure and renewal. I understood that forgiveness was not about excusing mistakes, but about acknowledging the truth, learning from it, and choosing to move forward with integrity. I understood that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt with patience and honesty, and that the bonds of family, when nurtured with love and respect, could endure even the deepest betrayals. And most importantly, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for my grandmother, whose foresight and love had preserved the truth. Gratitude for the opportunity to reclaim my place in the family. And gratitude for the chance to witness transformation, not just in Jason, but in myself. The peace I felt was not fleeting or superficial. It was the quiet, enduring satisfaction of knowing that the truth had prevailed, that love had endured, and that the foundation of our family, tested and strained, had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more deeply understood than ever before. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that life has a way of testing us in ways we never anticipate. Betrayal, I learned, can come from the most unexpected places, even from someone you have called family for decades, someone you grew up with, shared secrets with, laughed with, and assumed would always stand by you. It is a bitter pill to swallow to see someone you love and trust allow envy, misunderstanding, or pride to distort the very foundation of your relationship. For a time, it had left me questioning not just Jason, not just our bond, but even my own worth and place in a family I had always thought was steady and unshakable. Those moments of doubt, of invisibility, of feeling dismissed or attacked by someone so close, cut deeper than any external challenge could ever have done. But life, in its quiet, intricate way, has a rhythm of balance, and the truth has a way of surfacing, sometimes decades later, often in ways we never imagine. Grandma's foresight, the careful preservation of her memories, her gentle recordings and her deliberate documentation, were a reminder of the power of love and clarity. She had anticipated that doubts could arise, that misunderstandings could grow like weeds if left unchecked, and she had created a path for truth to emerge when it mattered most. Watching her on those videos, seeing her explain the confusion at my birth, watching the footage of Jason standing proudly beside her with me in her arms, I understood that family bonds are far stronger than envy, suspicion, or even lies. Her wisdom was a quiet but unshakable force, showing me that love can endure beyond doubts, and that truth, when documented and preserved, can heal wounds that words alone cannot reach. I also learned something about forgiveness. Forgiving Jason was not a moment of weakness, nor was it about condoning his actions. It was about understanding that resentment and anger, when held onto for too long, only perpetuate pain, and that honoring the legacy of someone like Grandma meant choosing love over bitterness, patience over pride. There is a power in forgiving, a subtle but transformative force that allows the heart to release burdens, to see beyond the immediate hurt, and to recognize the humanity in others, even when they falter. By choosing to forgive, I reclaimed my peace, not because he admitted he was wrong immediately, but because the truth was finally out, and I was able to see the depth of the love and foresight my grandmother had always invested in our family. It made me reflect on the fragility and resilience of family. Relationships are tested in unexpected ways, and sometimes the people we trust most can disappoint us, whether through misunderstanding, jealousy, or fear. But those relationships are also capable of profound repair when honesty, courage, and love guide the process. The confrontation with Jason, the discovery of the videos, the slow rebuilding of trust, all of it taught me that patience and clarity can restore even the most strained bonds. Truth, like water, finds its way through cracks, eroding lies and shaping understanding in ways we may not initially recognize. For anyone who has ever felt invisible, dismissed, or attacked by those closest to them, I want to share what I now know deeply in my bones. Your worth is not defined by the words or doubts of others, no matter how close they may be. When faced with suspicion, lies, or betrayal, seek the truth. Hold tightly to the love you know is real, and allow actions to reveal what words cannot. Sometimes the clarity we need is not immediate. Sometimes the validation comes years later, but it always comes if you are willing to look carefully, to remain patient, and to trust in the bonds that are genuine. Life has a remarkable way of balancing things, of revealing the layers beneath appearances, and of restoring what has been threatened. Sometimes it does so in ways that are subtle, almost imperceptible, and sometimes it does so with undeniable clarity, as it did for me that day on Grandma's porch, watching Jason confront his mistakes and feeling the weight of truth settle firmly into place. The lessons I carry now are simple yet profound. Love carefully, forgive willingly, preserve the truth, and trust that even when it seems the world questions your place, the bonds that matter most are unbreakable. My grandmother's foresight and love ensured that our family's story could never be rewritten by envy or doubt, and her lessons continue to guide me. A steady light reminding me that love and truth endure, sometimes in ways we never imagine, always in ways that shape who we are and the family we choose to honor. Sitting quietly now, reflecting on the journey from betrayal to truth, from doubt to clarity, I feel a sense of profound gratitude, not just for myself or for the reconciliation with my brother, but for the enduring wisdom of a woman who understood the fragility and strength of family better than anyone I have ever known. And as the sun sets on the memories of that chapter, I understand finally that even in the face of envy, doubt, and betrayal, the enduring bonds of love and truth will always prevail if we have the patience to wait and the courage to see. I sat back in Grandma's living room one last time before leaving, letting the quiet of the house settle over me like a familiar blanket. The room was bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun, light spilling across the worn furniture, the familiar photographs on the walls, and the delicate lace curtains fluttering softly in the evening breeze. The warmth of the sun seemed to seep into the corners of the room, into the very air itself, carrying with it a sense of closure I had been yearning for, a feeling I hadn't realized I had been missing until this very moment. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt truly at home, at peace with my past, my present, and the uncertain path of the future. As I looked around, memories washed over me, unbidden yet welcome, each one a reminder of the life I had lived within these walls, the laughter and the arguments, the quiet evenings spent listening to Grandma tell stories that seemed trivial at the time, but now resonated with deep significance. I remembered the smell of her cooking drifting from the kitchen, the faint scratch of her knitting needles, the way she would hum softly as she went about her day, all small gestures that had carried the immense weight of love and care. Every corner of that room, every object and photograph, felt infused with her presence, her foresight, and her unwavering belief in the power of truth and family bonds. It became clear to me then that family is far more than biology, far more than shared bloodlines or legal connections. Family is love, the kind that sustains you even when misunderstandings threaten to pull you apart. It is respect, the recognition of each other's worth and place in a shared history. It is the stories we pass down, the memories we safeguard, and the proof of connection that no jealousy, no doubt, and no betrayal can ever truly erase. Grandma had left me this proof, meticulously preserved and patiently hidden, as if she had known that one day I would need it not only to confront the misunderstandings of the present, but to understand the enduring power of love and truth across generations. I thought of Jason, the confrontation on the porch, the way his arrogance had crumbled when faced with undeniable evidence, and I realized that sometimes the strongest form of justice is quiet and patient. It does not roar or demand recognition. It does not humiliate or shame. It simply exists, waiting for the moment when it can reveal itself in full clarity, allowing those who have strayed to face the consequences of their choices. In that way, perhaps, The best revenge is not in retaliation or punishment, but in letting the truth speak for itself, allowing its weight and certainty to restore balance and understanding. Watching Jason come to that realization, witnessing his humility and his first tentative steps toward reconciliation, reminded me that life has a way of balancing itself when guided by honesty, patience, and courage. Sitting there, surrounded by the tangible reminders of Grandma's life, I felt a profound gratitude. Gratitude for her foresight, for the care she had taken to preserve the truth, and for the love that had shaped not only my childhood but the very foundation of the man I had become. I understood now that uncovering secrets, facing betrayal, and seeking truth are not acts of malice, but of courage, acts that honor both oneself and the legacy of those who came before us. I thought of all the moments I had felt invisible or dismissed, the times I had questioned my own worth because of someone else's doubt, and I realized that those moments, painful as they were, had led me to this clarity, this understanding that my place in the world, my value, and my family could never be denied when grounded in truth and love. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the floor, I took a deep breath, letting the stillness of the house, the warmth of the fading sunlight, and the quiet presence of Grandma's memory fill me completely. I understood that life is a mosaic of moments, of choices, of truths revealed and secrets uncovered, and that navigating it with patience, integrity, and courage is the truest form of justice one can find. The house had been a witness to generations of love, misunderstanding, and reconciliation, and I now felt its lessons imprinting on me as if Grandma were sitting beside me, smiling quietly, her wisdom echoing in the silence. And so, as I rose to leave for the last time, I carried with me more than memories. I carried clarity, a restored sense of belonging, and a deep, unshakable understanding of the enduring power of family, truth, and love. I knew that no envy, no lie, and no misunderstanding could ever sever the bonds that mattered, for they are rooted not in words but in actions, in proof, in the quiet consistency of love that withstands the tests of time. That day I had learned that patience, truth, and the courage to uncover secrets are not only the pillars of justice, but also the foundation of life itself, and that sometimes the most profound triumph, the most lasting revenge, is simply allowing the truth to shine, letting it speak louder than any accusation or doubt, and trusting that its clarity will restore what envy and misunderstanding tried to destroy. Sitting in that golden light, I finally understood, with a peace that ran deep into my bones, that life, family, and love are always worth the struggle, worth the patience, and worth the courage to face the shadows. And with that, I stepped out of the house, feeling whole, recognized, and infinitely grateful, carrying Grandma's legacy, the truth, and the strength of family forward into everything that lay ahead.